As we look at the past, I would hope we can get inspired by looking at the craftsmanship and looking at the details and long to build better because we see beautiful things like this. There are examples in little spots of greatness in America, but it's all over England. And when I toured there and went through some of those Georgian houses, the level is, 2 or 3 steps above what you see in America. I think it's money. I think it's, inside of Carter's Grove, which is one of the richest houses, or the Miles Bruton house in Charleston. There's some levels of detail that you're like, holy cow, I don't think I've seen anything like this. Now, you would see that in London, but there are a spattering of houses, just not the same level. And, I think it's money, would be my guess. So, the Carpenters Company of Philadelphia, there's this book, if you want to read more about it, Carpenters Company of the City and County of Philadelphia, the 1786 Rule Book. Now, it's kind of a fun story. Basically, the historian for the Carpenters Company was rummaging around in the attic of this building and found an old box and found this rule book for builders. Now, what that means is that the rule book was how to charge and how to estimate things as a builder. And so these guys in about 1724, 1720, get organized and say, you know what, business is going so fast. There's so many new apprentices coming into Philadelphia. We've got to, get together and kind of form a union, right? It's a little bit of a union. It's a little bit of a trade group. It's a little bit of a thing. Now, go back to London in England and the guilds, right? There is an apprenticeship system and journeyman and master system in England that falls apart after the Great Fire of 1666. So, as building happens and things like that, a lot of these guys are coming over to America, and in Philadelphia they organized into what's kind of a guild, kind of a union. This was set up so that they could, if someone died, they paid the widow a pension, and so they paid into this thing, but it also protected them. These guys were very well connected, and so they worked for the city, and they were like the zoning officers. And yeah, you've built over this building line, you've built over that building line. So they were really well connected, right? And important as far as how building happened in Philadelphia. They worked a number of different ways. They worked with a day rate, which is like an hourly rate, okay? They would work by a measure, okay? They worked, which is basically a unit price, or they worked as a kind of a progress completion kind of thing where there wasn't really a fixed price, but they were getting paid by the amount of work that they did. So, work happened a number of different ways. This is what their price book looked like, and realize that this was a very secretive book. It was said when someone died, they went to the widow's house and said, hey, we need our price book back. Jefferson in the 1800s, he said he wanted a copy and he couldn't get one. So, right? And if you're Thomas Jefferson, you can't get one. It's a secret book. Notice that in the second page, it talks about drawings. Drawings designed making out bills of scantling, collecting materials, and sticking up stuff are to be charged by the carpenters in proportion to the trouble. So, in other words, they were doing drawings, okay? There really aren't drawings at this stage. Certainly getting 8 pages or 20 pages or 100 pages of drawings didn't happen in this period. Even famous buildings like Independence Hall, they don't have the plans for that. There's pictures that I had where a mantle was drawn on the back of a board, and then that board was used inside the house. They found it later. So certainly seeing elevations wasn't happening. And so when you were building a house like this, you would say, here's the floor plan. This is kind of what I'm looking for, and you would just work it out. So if there are plans, they don't exist anymore, and the plans that we do know about might have 2 or 3 pages. In this book, they had everything broken out, right? So pounds, shillings, and pennies. By these things, I picked a page that actually had a very expensive thing, right? And they do everything from door jambs, different types of door jambs, moldings. This window dormer, right, was seven pounds, 10 shillings, okay? One of the more expensive things we had at this time. The siding on the side was an extra amount of money. The window was an extra amount of money. This is probably a 20 or 30 pound piece, right? All completely done. Now, my quick math is that builders were getting a journeyman were getting between 240 and 300 pounds a year. Okay, so about a pound a day. And so, if this is, 20 pounds, this is a few weeks of work, right? And so, anyway, it's kind of interesting looking at this and then seeing that, and this is like, 10 shillings, right? So, anyway, it's kind of interesting. I think it's interesting. Commercial construction. Yes, there was commercial construction. What it looked like is realize there's very few commercial buildings, right? You have churches, state houses, we're pretty much the commercial construction. And when these happened, they were built by and designed by committees, or they were designed by committees, run by committees, paid by committees, but often built by master builders. Okay? So Independence Hall was the Philadelphia State House. And basically they said, hey, we need a state house for Philadelphia. Let's put some money aside. Let's form a committee. Committee was made up of 3 or 4 guys. Each of those guys, it appears from the letters, went out and kind of came up with their own design. And then they got back together. They argued about it. One guy won, and he ends up having this design. And then they go to the Carpenters Company, right? The well-connected builders, and the Carpenters Company builds the building, and then the committee is the one that pays it out. It took about 10 years to build. So, commercial construction, I guess it's a little bit like it is today. If a church was building a building, they'd form a committee, they'd get together, they'd figure out the plans. The architect really, was the builder in this stage. Realized that the Georgian period is kind of the last period of the master builder architect person. It's after this, in the federal period, you have architects come about. You have Benjamin Latrobe, who was in Baltimore. He comes in. You have Bullfinch in Boston. So the architect that all he does is do drawings and does that stuff really wasn't around in this period. So it was a committee and then master builders who were building at this time. Faneuil Hall, this is the original Faneuil Hall. It was rebuilt with Bullfinch in the 1800s, but it was a market hall, okay? So this was near the wharf. It was a big market center below. They had a state house or a meeting room above, which obviously became very important during the Revolutionary War. But these were, these buildings and the civic buildings they built, except when they were churches, were oftentimes for commerce. And that's how this was built, and it was built the same way by committee.